The training arena smelled like burnt ozone and regret. I should clarify that statement. Actually, as a Varkathian combat instructor with 17 cycles of experience, I had witnessed approximately 4,326 species attempt our qualifying trials. Roughly half of them produced that exact combination of scorched atmosphere and crushed dreams before limping back to whatever backwater planet spawned them. Humans, though, they were supposed to be the worst of the lot. Commander Thex-9 stood beside me in the observation tower, all four of his eyes focused on the arena floor below. His mandibles clicked together in what I recognized as barely suppressed amusement. "This should be entertaining," he said, his translator rendering his speech in flat, emotionless tones that somehow made the sarcasm even more obvious. "Entertaining isn't the word I would use," I replied, adjusting my visual sensors to track the human approaching the center platform. "Tragic, perhaps. Brief, definitely." The human was female according to the data file, name Captain Jade Vance, height 5.7 feet, which meant absolutely nothing to me, until I converted it to proper measurements and realized she barely reached my lower thorax. Weight, classified, age 28 standard Earth years, combat experience, extensive, but against other humans, which meant precisely nothing out here. She walked with confidence. I noticed that was her first mistake. Confidence suggested she thought she understood what was about to happen. The universe has a delightful way of correcting that particular misconception. "Begin recording," Thex-9 commanded, his voice carrying across the chamber. "Let it be known that on this date in this cycle, the human designated Captain Jade Vance attempted qualification for the Galactic Defense Initiative." I watched her scan the arena, those primitive binocular eyes taking in the reinforced walls, the scoring sensors, the medical station positioned at what humans would call 12 o'clock. Her face remained neutral. No fear, no excitement. Just observation. "Interesting. Attention, candidate," I announced, my voice amplified through the arena's speaker system. The translation software converted my natural Varkathian into something her primitive auditory organs could process. "You stand in the crucible of proving. Here, we separate the capable from the corpses." She looked up at the observation tower, made direct eye contact with me, which was either incredibly brave or monumentally stupid, possibly both. "I have reviewed your species' combat records," I continued, allowing a hint of contempt to color my words. Why not? It was accurate. 17 engagement simulations, 12 deaths, 3 psychological breakdowns, 2 cases of immediate surrender. "Your odds are, to use a human expression, not good." "Noted," she replied, her voice steady. Just one word. No bravado, no threats, no desperate attempts to prove herself before the trial even began. Thex-9's mandibles clicked faster. "The trial is simple," I explained, descending from the observation deck. My combat chassis, all 7 feet of reinforced carapace and articulated limbs, carried me to the arena floor with predatory grace. "You will face me in single combat. The objective, land a killing blow within a time limit." I reached the center platform, towering over her. Up close, humans looked even more fragile. Soft skin, no natural armor, laughably limited sensory organs. How this species survived to develop space travel remained one of the galaxy's great mysteries. "The time limit," I said, letting the pause stretch for dramatic effect, "is 3 seconds. She blinked. Once, twice. Then her mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. 3 seconds, she repeated. "Correct. From the moment I signal start, you have 3 seconds to demonstrate a combat maneuver that would, in actual engagement, result in my termination." I flexed my primary combat arms, the razor-sharp talons extending with satisfying clicks. Most species require clarification at this point, so let me be explicit. I will not be stationary. I will not be cooperative. I will be actively attempting to kill you. "Got it," she said, rolling her shoulders in what I recognized as a human warm-up gesture. 3 seconds to put you down." The audacity almost made me laugh. Almost. "Instructor Krell," Thex-9's voice crackled through my internal con. Perhaps we should review the human's file more thoroughly before— Unnecessary, I interrupted. Her file lists no cybernetic enhancements, no psionic capabilities, no combat mutations. She is baseline human. This will be concluded quickly. I returned my attention to Vance. She had moved into a stance, feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced, hands loose at her sides. It was actually a decent posture, I admitted internally. Wrong for fighting a Varkothian, but decent. Any questions before we begin? I asked, more out of protocol than genuine concern. Just one, she said, and that almost smile returned. When you say 3 seconds, are we talking Earth seconds or some other measurement I should know about? Standard galactic seconds, I replied, approximately equivalent to your Earth seconds. We are not, despite what your propaganda suggests, trying to cheat you. Good to know. She shifted her weight slightly, a microscopic adjustment that brought her center of gravity lower. In that case, I should probably mention something. Which is, 1 second is enough. For a moment actual silence filled the arena. Then Thex9's laughter burst through the comm system, all 4 of his voice boxes engaged in full, wheezing hilarity. I felt my mandibles spread in what humans would recognize as a grin. They would be wrong, of course. Varkothians don't grin. We bare our feeding apparatus in anticipation of rendering flesh from bone. 1 second, I repeated, making sure my translator captured every nuance of my scorn. Human, I have trained for 17 cycles. I have mastered 43 combat forms across 22-dimensional axes. I have survived engagements with Krellian war beasts, Threxy assassins, and twice cursed Morthian berserkers. What precisely makes you think you can threaten me in 1 second? She just looked at me with those soft, primitive eyes. Want to find out? She asked. I should have recognized the warning signs. The absolute stillness in her posture. The way her respiratory rate hadn't increased despite the stress of the situation. The complete absence of fear pheromones that every other species broadcast like distress beacons when facing a Varkothian in combat stance. I should have remembered that humans didn't climb to interstellar capability through strength or natural weapons. They did it through something far more dangerous. Pattern recognition. Tool use, adaptability, and apparently audacity that bordered on insanity. Very well, I said, activating the timer system. On my mark, the trial begins. 3. She didn't wait for one. In the space between heartbeats, 3 things happened simultaneously. First, her hand moved to her belt, faster than my combat-trained reflexes predicted. Second, something small and metallic flew through the air in a perfect arc. Third, my world exploded into chaos. Not figuratively, literally. The device she threw detonated exactly 40 centimeters from my head, releasing what humans call a flashbang. For species with standard visual spectrums, this is merely disorienting. For Varkothians whose eyes process ultraviolet and infrared simultaneously, it's like having your brain scraped out through your optical nerves with a rusty implement. I was blind, completely, totally blind. My combat training kicked in immediately. Area denial, sweeping attacks, force the opponent to retreat while sensory systems reboot. I lashed out with both primary combat arms, talons extended covering the space where she had been standing. My claws hit nothing but air. Instructor Krell, Thex9's voice was no longer amused. Your vitals are spiking. Should I? Do not intervene, I snarled, spinning to cover my vulnerable back. My optical systems were already clearing faster than human sight would recover, but those microseconds felt like eternities. When my vision returned, Vance wasn't in front of me. She was behind me. Specifically, she was on my back, having somehow scaled my combat chassis during my moment of blindness. One of her arms wrapped around my neck ridge, the other hand pressing something cold and hard against the seam where my cranial armor met my thorax. Bang, she whispered, close enough that I could feel her breath on my carapace. The timer display, still visible in my peripheral vision, read 0.9 seconds elapsed. I froze. Completely, utterly froze. Because the object pressed against my armor seam wasn't a weapon. It was her finger. but the position was perfect. Precise. The exact vulnerable point that every Varkothian learns to protect in their first cycle of combat training. The spot where a blade or a shaped charge, or even a sufficiently determined finger with enough force behind it, could slip between plates and sever the neural cluster that controlled everything below the neck. She had found my kill spot in less than 1 second. How? I managed to say, my translator struggling to convey the mixture of shock, respect and genuine confusion in my voice. Did you know? Your file was available to me too, she replied, still maintaining that perfect, deadly position. 17 cycles of training, 43 combat forms, very impressive credentials. Know what your file didn't mention? That 12 years ago, a Varkothian named Instructor Krell submitted a paper to the Galactic Combat Journal, detailing vulnerability analysis in armored species. My secondary heart skipped synchronized beats. You included yourself as a case study, she continued. Very thorough work, by the way. The diagrams were especially helpful. X9's laughter had stopped. The arena had gone absolutely silent, except for my own breathing and the faint hum of the scoring sensors. You read academic journals? I asked, because apparently my brain had decided that was the most important question in this situation. I read everything, she said, finally stepping down from my back and moving to where I could see her properly. Your paper. The tactical analysis of every species in the GDI, the psychological profiles, the cultural contexts. You know what I learned? I shook my head, still processing what had just happened. Everyone underestimates humans because we're soft and small and slow, she said, and now her smile was sharp enough to cut through my armor. But you know what humans are really, really good at? What? I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. Research. We don't have claws, so we invented knives. We don't have armor, so we invented tactics. We don't have your strength, so we learned exactly where to apply force for maximum effect. She gestured at the timer, still frozen at 0.9 seconds. You gave me 3 seconds. I only needed 0.9. Want to know why? I nodded, because apparently I had lost the capacity for coherent speech, because I spent 3 weeks preparing for this moment. 3 weeks reading, studying, analyzing every scrap of information available about Varkothian combat doctrine. 3 weeks learning your patterns, your instincts, your vulnerabilities. Her expression softened slightly. You're an excellent instructor, Krell. Your tactical mind is impressive. But you made one critical error. Which was? You assumed I would fight fair. The arena speakers crackled as X9 found his voice again. Trial, concluded. Victory, human. He sounded like someone had hit him with a flashbang too. Qualification, approved. Vance extended her hand in the human gesture of respect. After a moment's hesitation, I touched my primary claw to her palm, careful not to break that absurdly fragile skin. Welcome to the Galactic Defense Initiative, Captain Vance, I said, my translator finally capturing something like respect. Thank you, Instructor Krell. She glanced at the observation deck where X9 stood, probably still processing what he had witnessed. So do all your trials end with the instructor having an existential crisis? And despite everything, despite my shattered pride, despite the complete upending of my understanding of human capabilities, despite the fact that I would never live this down, I found myself making the Varkothian sound for genuine amusement. No, I admitted. This is a first. Good, she said, that dangerous smile returning. I'd hate to be predictable. The medical bay smelled like antiseptic and humble pie. I sat on the examination platform while the automated scanners checked my vitals, even though I had insisted, repeatedly, that I was perfectly fine. X9 had overridden my protests with the kind of authority that suggested he was enjoying this situation far more than was professionally appropriate. Your neural cluster readings show elevated stress hormones. The medical drone announced in its irritatingly cheerful voice. This is consistent with experiencing a significant shock to your established worldview. The drone is being sarcastic, I said flatly. The drone is programmed for accurate psychological assessment, X9 replied from the doorway, his mandibles clicking in barely suppressed amusement. Although I personally would have phrased it as getting absolutely demolished by a human half your size. I turned all three of my visual senses on him. "Commander, with respect, shut up." He laughed, which was entirely inappropriate given that I was technically his subordinate, having just experienced the most humiliating 15 minutes of my career. Well, 15 minutes if you counted the actual trial, the stunned silence afterward and the walk to medical, while every staff member in the facility stared at me like I had grown a fifth arm. Captain Vance had been escorted to the integration briefing, which meant she was currently learning about supply requisitions and housing assignments, instead of being here to witness my medical evaluation. Small mercies. "The preliminary scores are calculated," X9 said, his tone shifting to something more professional. "You want to hear them? Do I have a choice?" "Not particularly." He activated his wrist display, the holographic readout floating between us. Combat effectiveness, 97%. Tactical innovation, 99%. Adaptability under pressure, maximum possible score. Speed of execution, 0.9 seconds, which, I should mention, breaks the previous record by 2 full seconds. I stared at the numbers. Who held the previous record? A Krellian shock trooper with cybernetic enhancements and precognitive abilities. Of course. "There is more," X9 continued, and something in his voice made my primary heart sink. "The recording has been circulated through the training command network per standard protocol. You are currently the subject of approximately 14,000 commentary threads across 9 different species communication platforms." I closed all three eyes. "How bad?" "There is a betting pool on whether you will ever conduct another trial. The odds are not in your favor." He paused. "Also, someone created a holographic recreation of the trial and set it to human music. Something called Another One Bites the Dust. I am told it is quite popular. I want to die." "Medically inadvisable," the drone chirped. "Your species has an average lifespan of 90 cycles. You have only completed 34. 56 more cycles of this," I muttered. "Wonderful." X9 deactivated his display and moved closer, his posture shifting into something that resembled actual sympathy. "Krell, listen to me. What happened today was not a failure on your part. I was defeated in under 1 second by a species we classified as minimal threat level. You were outmaneuvered by an opponent who used superior intelligence gathering and tactical planning to overcome a significant physical disadvantage," he corrected. "That is precisely the kind of thinking we need in the GDI. You should be proud." "Proud," I repeated. "Yes, nothing says pride like being used as a training dummy." "Actually," a new voice said from the doorway, "I was hoping we could talk about that." Captain Vance stood there, still wearing her training uniform, looking entirely too pleased with herself. Behind her, I noticed Lieutenant Tarek, my second instructor, trying very hard not to make eye contact with me. "Captain," I said, managing to keep my voice level, "congratulations on your qualification. Should you not be attending your briefing?" "Finished early," she said, stepping into the medical bay like she owned it. "Turns out when you spend 3 weeks studying GDI protocols, the orientation session goes pretty fast." She glanced at X9. "Mind if I borrow your instructor for a few minutes, Commander?" X9's mandibles spread in what was definitely amusement. "By all means. I believe Instructor Krell's schedule has suddenly become quite flexible." He left, taking the medical drone with him, which meant I was alone with the human who had just systematically destroyed my reputation. Excellent. Vance pulled over a chair, the kind designed for species without exoskeletons, and sat down facing me. "So you are probably wondering why I am here." The thought had crossed my mind. I need to apologize. That was unexpected enough that I actually blinked all 3 eyes in sequence. Apologize? For what? Succeeding? "For embarrassing you," she said, and her expression had shifted into something that looked genuinely remorseful. "That flashbang trick, the vulnerability analysis, I knew it would work. I also knew it would make you look bad in front of everyone watching. I did it anyway because I needed to pass that trial, and I needed to pass it spectacularly." I studied her for a moment. "Why spectacularly?" She leaned back in her chair, and suddenly she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. Because I am the first human selected for active GDI combat duty. Not training, not support roles, actual frontline assignment. Every species in this facility is watching to see if humans deserve to be here. If I had barely scraped by, if I had used all 3 seconds and gotten lucky, they would have said it was a fluke. But this, she gestured vaguely at the space between us. Nobody can say this was luck. So you sacrificed my dignity for your species' reputation, I said slowly. Yes, no hesitation, no equivocation. I did, and I am genuinely sorry that you were the cost of that message. But I would do it again, because the message mattered. The honest answer surprised me more than the flashbang had. Most species, when caught in political maneuvering, at least had the decency to pretend otherwise. You realize this means every instructor in the facility will now be preparing specifically for human tactics, I pointed out. You have made your own path significantly more difficult. Good, she said, and that sharp smile returned. Easy does not build capability. Besides, you think I only have one trick. Despite myself, I felt my mandibles spread slightly. You have others? Instructor Krell. I have 17. She stood up, offering her hand again in that strange human gesture. But here is what I really came to say. You are a good teacher. That paper you wrote, the vulnerability analysis, it was not just about Varkathians. You detailed tactical thinking, pattern recognition, strategic planning. Reading that paper taught me more about combat theory than 6 months of human military academy. I looked at her extended hand, then back at her face. You are saying I taught you how to defeat me? Technically, yes. That is either deeply ironic or deeply satisfying. I cannot decide which. Can it be both? She asked. I reached out and touched my claw to her palm again, more confidently this time. Perhaps. Although I suspect you will keep me confused on that point for the foreseeable future. Probably, she admitted cheerfully. So, want to hear my actual question? There is more? Always. She withdrew her hand and crossed her arms, her expression turning serious. How would you have beaten me? If you could reset the trial, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently? The question caught me off guard. You want tactical advice on defeating yourself? I want to get better, she corrected. That stunt worked once on you, under specific conditions. Next time I face a Varkathian, they will be ready for flashbangs and vulnerability analysis. So, how do I adapt? I considered her for a long moment. Around us, the medical bay hummed with automated systems, running diagnostics on equipment that did not need diagnosing, because apparently the entire facility wanted an excuse to avoid the instructor who got beaten in under 1 second. But Captain Jade Vance, the human who had just humiliated me in front of the entire GDI training command, wanted to learn from me. You would not use the flashbang as an opening move, I said finally. You would use it as a contingency, open with something that forces me to commit to a defensive pattern, then exploit the gap in my response with the sensory attack. She nodded slowly. What kind of opening? Feint high, strike low, Varkathian combat doctrine. Prioritizes protecting the cranial cluster, because that is where most species aim. We are trained to respond to upper body threats with overwhelming force. A serious low attack would trigger defensive protocols I would have to honor, creating the opening you need. Even knowing I might be fainting? Especially knowing you might be fainting, I said. Because if you are not fainting, and I fail to respond, I lose my legs. Combat doctrine does not gamble on opponent intentions. Her eyes had that sharp, focused quality I was beginning to recognize as her learning expression. What else? What else? I repeated. What else did I do wrong? Because I know I did not execute perfectly. No plan survives contact with the enemy, right? So what would you have exploited if you had recovered faster? And there it was again. That aggressive, almost reckless pursuit of improvement that I was starting to suspect was not unique to Captain Vance, but rather a fundamental characteristic of her entire species. Humans did not just want to win, they wanted to win better next time. Your dismount was inefficient, I said, shifting into instructor mode almost reflexively. You stepped down from my back instead of using the momentum to launch toward cover. If I had recovered my vision even half a second faster, that positioning would have been fatal. Where should I have gone? Forward roll, use my body mass as a shield, come up in a firing position 3 meters at my 2 o'clock. Forces me to turn, buys you time, maintains offensive pressure. She walked through the motion, slowly, her body moving with surprising grace for a species without a tail for balance. Like this, lower center of gravity. Your species has that annoying bipedal instability. Compensate by staying closer to the ground. She adjusted, and the movement became significantly more effective. Better. How do I fix it? I stood up from the examination platform, my full height making her crane her neck to maintain eye contact. You practice, repeatedly, until the movement pattern becomes automatic enough that your conscious mind is not involved in the execution. How many repetitions? For a human, probably 10,000, maybe 20. She did not even blink. When do we start? We, I asked. You are my instructor now, right? She said, and that smile was back. Or are you going to let one embarrassing trial define your entire career? The audacity of this species, I thought. Not for the first time that day. You are manipulating me, I observed. Yes, it is working. I know. I made the Vocothian sound for resigned acceptance. Training begins at dawn cycle tomorrow. Do not be late. I will be early, she promised, heading toward the door. Oh, and Instructor Krell, one more thing. What? That academic paper you wrote. You should publish a follow-up about adaptive tactics when facing opponents who have studied your vulnerabilities. She grinned. I think it would be very popular right now. She left before I could formulate a response, which was probably wise on her part. X9 reappeared in the doorway approximately 30 seconds later, which suggested he had been listening to the entire conversation. So, he said, mandibles clicking with barely suppressed amusement, I see you have acquired a human student. Apparently, this will either be the best decision of your career, or the worst. Considering my career currently includes being a viral entertainment phenomenon, I am not certain it can get worse. Optimism, X9 said. From you, the human really did break something fundamental, did she not? I considered the questions seriously. Commander, do you know what I realized during that trial? What? For 17 cycles I have been teaching species how to fight using advantages they already possess. Strength, speed, natural weapons, enhanced senses. The humans have none of those things, which means teaching them requires entirely new approaches, and that excites you. Terrifies me, I corrected. But yes, also excites me. I looked at the doorway where Vance had disappeared. She defeated me with research and planning. Imagine what she could do with actual training. Imagine what an entire species like her could do, X9 said quietly. We stood there for a moment, both contemplating that thought. The galaxy is not ready for humans, I said finally. No, X9 agreed, but perhaps that is exactly why we need them. The next morning, Captain Jade Vance arrived at the training arena, 45 minutes early, carrying a data pad containing notes on 17 different Vocothian combat instructors and their documented tactical preferences. I should have been insulted. Instead, I found myself looking forward to the challenge. Because if there was one thing I had learned in the last 24 hours, it was this. Humans might be small, soft, and physically unimpressive by galactic standards, but they possessed something far more dangerous than claws or armor or enhanced senses. They possessed the absolute, unshakable conviction that any problem could be solved with sufficient preparation, creativity, and sheer stubborn refusal to accept limitations. Ready to begin? I asked her. She smiled a dangerous smile. 1 second is enough, she said. Let us see what I can do with a whole training cycle. And despite everything, despite my bruised pride and viral infamy, I found myself looking forward to finding out. The galaxy was not ready for humans, but I was going to help them get there anyway.